أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيبي إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيت الله الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. صدق الله العلي العظيم. In the name of Allah, the All Beneficent, the All Merciful. The month of Ramadan is one in which the Quran was sent down as guidance to mankind, with manifest proofs of guidance in the criterion. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 185. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We would like to welcome you all to our 2025 Shahr Ramadan program at the Islamic Center of America, hosted by the United Network of Islam. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with another opportunity in seeking closeness to Him in the holy month of Ramadan. May Allah accept and reward all your efforts in worship in these blessed days and nights, inshallah. Before we begin our tonight's program, we would like to recite some verses from the Holy Quran. Please help me welcome Brother Ibrahim Ajami to the stage after 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
Yeah. No. I'm sorry. Not this. You're good. Take it. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. ثانية على حب الزهراء صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم
ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وذل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد
Okay. Test. Okay. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Thank you, Brother Ibrahim, for that beautiful recitation. If we can give him another loud salawat. So just a couple announcements before we get started with tonight's program, inshallah. If everyone in the back can move up to the front to fill in any vacant seats, so the people in the back who are wondering can just fill up the spots as easy from the back. Thank you. And also there's a question QR code that's being passed around or in the back of the program when you walk in. So if you'd like to submit a question, just please scan that and it'll direct you to the link to submit your question, inshallah. The Medina Bookstore, alhamdulillah, through the tawfiq of Allah and the efforts of the sisters and brothers of the UNI, we have made an initiative to truly dedicate our efforts in reviving the Medina Bookstore in hopes that we can sincerely give proper Islamic education about our beliefs from our grand respected scholars of the modern era that have truly done great work for the sake of Allah and Islam. The Medina Bookstore will be open every night during and after the program in the month of Ramadan. If you have any questions, please see me or one of the organizers after the program. In the holy month of Ramadan, we are taking sponsors each night to help us all with our UNI programming, bookstore, and so much more. In our traditions, we usually always donate on behalf of our deceased. General nightly donations are set to $100 per night and $300 to sponsor a Suhoor with a Scholar event. If you would like to sponsor a night, please meet with me or one of the organizers after the program, inshallah. Tonight's donation is on the behalf of Marhum Haj Hamid Saab. If we can please recite Surah Al-Fatiha on his behalf, بعد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Thank you. Make sure to keep up with the UNI on Instagram at UNIORG_. That's at UNIORG_ for weekly programs and events throughout the year. For those who don't have social media, please see me or one of the organizers after the program so we can put you in one of the WhatsApp announcements chat where all the details will be shared there as well, inshallah. So without further ado, please help welcome my sincere friend, my mentor, and my brother, Samahat al-Sheikh Ahmad Cherri, after 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. I begin in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. May the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon his final messenger Muhammad and his blessed and purified progeny. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers, dear sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hopefully the brothers and sisters in the back can hear me, because I heard that yesterday there was a bit of an issue, it was a bit low. So is the voice fine in the back? Can I have raised hands? Good? Ahsant. So yesterday we talked about how knowledge precedes faith. That was one of the points that we talked about, that knowledge precedes faith. And that's a distinguishing factor between us and the rest of the world religions. That in Islam, it's not enough to have faith first and then accept and move forward. You have to know that which you believe in. And that it's incumbent upon every Muslim to learn about their faith, especially their usul al-din. So knowledge precedes faith. And we also talked about the division of knowledge into two parts. We talked about experiential knowledge and we talked about acquired knowledge. And we said that acquired knowledge requires a medium, requires a middle person or a middle thing in order to reach that knowledge. And we talked about the importance of experience as well, the legitimacy of experience and the importance of experience. But the fact of the matter is that knowledge, although it does precede faith, there is that it's not necessarily always an acquired knowledge. There is a pre-existent knowledge within all of us. Meaning, it's not that we don't know who God is, and then someone tells us who God is, and then we pursue God. We are born with an intrinsic knowledge, what they call an intrinsic knowledge, meaning a knowledge that's God-given, that everybody has equally. And it's that experience that we have, that knowledge that is God-given, that is innate, that everybody has, that allows us to begin that pursuit to begin with. And this is the fitrah. And this is something that everybody has equally. And this is why we hear the statement that everyone is born a Muslim. Everyone is born somebody who has already submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has already submitted to the real, to that divine reality. And so, whilst yes, in regular circumstances, knowledge precedes faith and it's a distinguishing factor, everybody already has that knowledge within them. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed us all with an intellect. This very intellect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses. And based upon this intellect, are we punished? And based upon this intellect, are we rewarded? But there are things that distract us, things that make an individual become perverse, take them off the path. And that's why self-discipline is important. Jihad is important. The discipline of the self, struggle against oneself in order to maintain that state of purity. And this is one of the distinguishing factors of fasting. One of the attributes of fasting is it assists in that self-discipline. In the narration of the Mi'raj of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he went from Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Palestine, peace be upon its righteous inhabitants and upon all those who have died on its path. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a long narration. We only took the part that has to do with fasting that's relevant to us today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he says, "O Ahmad," Ahmad being the name of the Prophet in the heavens, known in the heavens as Ahmad, known on the earth as Muhammad, sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah said, "O Ahmad, fasting begets wisdom, and wisdom begets knowledge, ma'rifah, and knowledge begets certainty, yaqeen. When my servant attains certainty, he no longer cares how his morning or evening passes." This is a fasting that's being referred to here, is the true form of fasting. Not just staying away from that which we are told not to eat or not to drink, for example, for X number of hours, but staying away from all that which displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Giving ourselves an opportunity to experience that self-struggle against all those things that we indulge in throughout the entire year. Fasting begets wisdom. Wisdom begets knowledge, ma'rifah. Ma'rifah is not an ordinary form of knowledge. Why? Because here, again, going back to the division of the two types of knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that fasting gives you that form of knowledge. He's not saying that reading a book about fasting gives you that knowledge. Listening to a lecture about fasting gives you that knowledge. So the act of fasting in and of itself grants that person, that individual, wisdom. So it's a form of purification, not just on a cellular and molecular level, but also on a spiritual level. It purifies you. Why? Yesterday, we ended with mentioning the human heart. And we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking and asking us to present our hearts. He's addressing our hearts. That heart that can receive directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. the heart that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to. It's that cleansing and purification process that takes place to the heart that begets that wisdom. Wisdom is a superior form of knowledge. It's not an ordinary standard form of knowledge. A wise person is considered wise because they have something that other individuals don't have. And that's why they're considered wise. And if they were saying something that everybody else is saying, then they wouldn't really be considered superior or different or sufficient or capable of being called something other than an ordinary individual, a standard individual. So fasting, the act in and of itself, begets wisdom. Wisdom begets knowledge, ma'rifah. What type of knowledge is being referred to here? Fasting is a window of opportunity, not just for us to experience a different experience, but us to realize, for example, the hold that food or the hold that water or the hold that music or the hold that our tongues have over us. It takes us and gives us an opportunity to take a break for once and self-analyze and reflect and realize what we've done throughout the entire year, how big these things are in our lives. For example, when we fast throughout the entire day and we're suffering through hunger and we're very hungry and we prepare a large banquet, we realize in that moment that as large as the banquet is, I have a limit. As hungry as I feel, and in that moment I might feel that I'm able to eat the entire dinner table, that I feel satiated within a short amount of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and that entire struggle, all the worry that I had throughout the day, my hunger getting in the way of my thinking, my hunger getting in the way of my work, my hunger getting in the way of my sleep, thinking about what I'm going to eat, thinking about what I'm going to prepare, all those sensations that I'm going over in my mind, all of it is done in a matter of minutes. And as beautiful as that plate looked in the beginning, towards the end, we can't look at food anymore. And it makes us think and consider, what other things in my life do I place such importance upon that take up so much of my time? And we say the word time here because, again, brothers and sisters, time is the most precious thing that you have. The most precious thing that you have. You can't get it back. Money that you lose, you can get back. Even if you lose a child, you can have another child. Even if you lose your job, you can get another job. But time is precious. Those hours, those minutes, those days, those seconds that we spend worrying and concerned about this dunya, eventually it'll go away. Was it worth it? And it makes us consider and makes us reflect upon our state and ourselves. And knowledge begets certainty. Knowledge is a light and ignorance is a darkness. Ignorance is a darkness. Certainty is the most intense forms of light. When a person is certain about certain realities, like the akhirah, like the temporal nature of this world, they can truly work towards it. Now, in the akhlaqi discussions, they say that knowledge alone is insufficient for action. Meaning it's not enough just to know. Because if we think about it, we know a lot of things. We know that certain things aren't good for us, but that's not going to deter us from not doing them. For example, smoking is a relevant example. And this is not a pro or anti-smoking stance. This is just an example to describe this reality. That for a person who smokes, as much as you're told that smoking isn't good for you, as many labels as they paste on the tobacco, as many pictures of rotten lungs or whatever they decide to put on the tobacco, it's not going to deter you from going and buying it. If you ask anybody who's honest that smokes, they'll tell you it's not good for me. But they'll do it anyways. So that knowledge doesn't always push a person to action. And that's why the heart is addressed. It's supposed to be knowledge and willpower. Sometimes it's not an issue of knowing what's right. It's having the motivation to do what's right. And that's why we want to emphasize on love. Love being the greatest motivator in humanity, for good and for bad. Those who have a love for money are greedy. those who have a love for power, harm and oppress, those who have a love for good, do good, those who have a love for nature, protect nature. Love is the motivator for everything that we do. It all comes from a place of love that comes from the human heart. So that purification of the heart is necessary. We can't neglect it. You see, we grow on an intellectual level. You know, C.S. Lewis, he has a very famous statement, and it's very relevant. If I can remember it, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If I can remember it correctly, he says that you are not a person with a soul, or you're not a body with a soul. You are a soul with a body. That distinction is very important. That we remember that our actual reality is that we are a soul. And this comes down to this idea that we might grow in our fields on an intellectual level. We go to school, we go to university, we study, and year after year we find ourselves growing in that field. What began as basic arithmetic and basic mathematics and geometry becomes calculus and so on. And we grow in our field. On a physical level, we also grow. We grow taller, we grow bigger, we grow older. But do we take a moment of time to consider whether spiritually we have grown or have not grown? And this is what Shahr Ramadan comes to emphasize. It comes to remind us once again that, oh human being, you have a soul. This is your reality. You might have throughout the entire year been concerned with how you look, been concerned with what you studied and where you are and what position you're in life, but you've neglected your soul this entire time. It has to grow as well. And this is why we have to reflect on the ad'iyah. We have to go to the words of the Ma'sumin, those who are perfect in their souls, have perfected their souls, and take wisdom and knowledge from them, even in addressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amuli, one of our esteemed scholars who passed away, and a grand mystic, used to say that if you want to understand who God is, go over the words of the Ma'sumin, of the infallibles, of the Imams, in their du'as, not in their conversations with people. Because the Ma'sum is ordered to speak to people according to their capacity. And if the person is a farmer, he'll speak to them in a language that the farmer understands. And if a person is a philosopher, he'll speak the language of a philosopher. But when he's speaking to the infinite, there are wisdoms and pearls of knowledge that you will not find elsewhere. And that's why we're going over the conversation between the absolute and the infinite. And the best of creation, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When my servant attains certainty, he no longer cares how his morning or evening passes. The changing of the day and the night and the passing of time is not so much a concern as what was done in their inner state during that day and during that night. And when he enters the hereafter, he shall be among my chosen saints, my awliya. It's translated as saints and also translated as friends of God. And the truthful ones, the siddiqeen. Yesterday we received a question in the Q&A whether one can reach a certain spiritual station. I think what was mentioned was imama. Siddiqeen is also one of the spiritual stations that one can reach. Generally, when we see the word siddiqeen in the narrations, it's referring to prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Sayyidah Maryam alayhi salam is also referred to as al-siddiqa. Sayyidah Zahra is also referred to as al-siddiqa, salamullah alayha. So this is a station, a spiritual station that one reaches, where they become a friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll go to another narration that speaks of the Siddiqeen. In the narration, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to one of his righteous servants, أوحى الله إلى بعض الصديقين. Among my servants are those who love me and I love them. They yearn for me, and I yearn for them. وَيَشْتَاقُونَ إِلَيْهِ وَأَشْتَاقُ إِلَيْهِ. They yearn for me, they miss me, and I miss them. And their concern is their separation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're the ones who seek liqa Allah azza wa jal. They want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not concerned with this world. They're concerned with when they're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the state that they're going to be in when they meet God. Well, we're all going to meet God, but we decide which aspect of God we want to meet. Do we want to travel towards the compassionate, the merciful, the beautiful, or do we want to go towards the vengeful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the majestic, the one who is just, the one who will take revenge for all the misdeeds that we have created? It's within our hands and based on our own deeds. So we decide. But regardless, we're all going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they yearn for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the day and during the night. وَيَذْكُرُونَنِي وَأَذْكُرَهُمْ. They remember me and I remember them. فَإِنْ أَخَذْتَ طَرِيقَهُمْ أَحْبَبْتُكَ. If you take their path, I shall love you. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is likely addressing a prophet who heard about these lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's a friend of God. And he wants to know how to go on their path. If you take their path, I shall love you. And if you turn away from them, I shall detest you. And then the servant asked, "O Lord, what are the signs? How do I find these people, these siddiqeen, these friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?" Well, he's a siddiq, these lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds, "They guard the shadows of the day as a shepherd watches over his flock." Initially in the Ma'raj, said they have no concern for whether it's day or night. No concern becomes clarified here. It's not there, it's irrelevant to them, the day or night. It's very relevant for a lover of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the way they approach their observation of the day and the night is different. They guard the shadows of the day as a shepherd watches over his flock. They long for the setting of the sun as a bird longs for its nest at dusk. They are individuals who wait for night to come by. Well, this is hard for us to absorb and understand in our day and age, considering that our circadian rhythms are thrown off. Well, most likely, we long for the night because that's when our day begins. And we long for the day just to go to sleep, generally speaking, unfortunately. They long for the setting of the sun as a bird longs for its nest at dusk. But when night falls and darkness spreads, when beds are laid and lovers retreat to their beloveds, they stand upon their feet and lower their faces in prostration before me. These are the lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They wait for the night and they observe the shadows. The night is they are only concerned with the night in that it's an opportunity for them to get a moment of privacy with their beloved, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They whisper to me in my own words, and they supplicate to me with my blessings. They whisper to me in my own words. This is also an interesting point, in that if you think about it, well, in all religions, there's a division when it comes to prayer. There's personal prayer, and there's canonical prayer. Canonical prayer is canon. Canon meaning that you cannot add or remove. You can't change. It's a legal form of prayer. Or it's a prayer that's been revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you can't change anything in it. You can't add your own words. The difference, for example, would be reciting the Quran in Salah, and then qunut would be a personal prayer. Personal prayer because in qunut, you can say whatever you want. In fact, for most maraja in qunut, you can recite qunut in any language that you want. You can talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in English if that makes you more comfortable. If that comes from a deeper place within your heart, then in qunut, you don't have to say qunut in Arabic in the first place. But that's a personal prayer. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they whisper to me in my own words. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first of all, first and foremost, he knows how he should be addressed. This, on the spot, I recall the never-ending question with regards to tawassul, and individuals that ask, why can't I go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly? Which, by the way, is the same statement that Iblis made when asked to do sujood to Nabi Adam alayhi salam. He says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in objection, "Oh Allah, exempt me from this one act and I will worship you, a worship never before seen. Never before seen. Just make me not have to bow to Adam alayhi salam." And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds, "Uridu an u'bad min haythu urid." I would like to be worshipped as I want to be worshipped. You don't worship me according to your own whims. That's something to remember, brothers and sisters, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the king. He's the majestic. It's not a matter of, can I go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly? Who are you going to? Are you going to your friend's house? Are you going to your neighbor? Are you going to Home Depot?Here are you going? You're going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not something of my own choice. There has to be a level of humility. You are a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't worship God according to your own whims, according to your own desires. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is approached. When He decides, He is approached in the means that He decides. If He selects a mediator, it has to be done through that medium and not without. And it is not accepted otherwise. They whisper to me in my own words, and they supplicate to me with my blessings. In the narration, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Nabi Musa alayhi salam, He says, "O Moses, allow my servants or endow my servants with love of me." And Nabi Musa alayhi salam says, "How can I make your servants love you?" He says, "Remind them of my blessings, of my ni'am, my blessings upon them. And then they will love me. When they remember everything that I have given them." And again, what form of knowledge is this? Did He say, "Oh Musa, write a book"? "Oh Musa, make a documentary"? That's not to say, again, not to diminish the importance of books or documentaries or lectures. It's to say what we're talking here about experience. Experiencing that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through what? Everything that you need, you already have. Allah has given it to you. This ability to think, this ability to ponder, this ability to speak. Look at Shahr Ramadan. What other creature on this earth, on the face of this planet, has been given the honor and the blessing to fast? Neither the animals have been addressed to fast, nor the trees, nor the stones, nor the planets, nor the stars, nor the sun, nor the moon. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looked at all this creation, and with His mercy, He glanced at us, those who neglect Him, and asked us to, and chose us as to be the subject of that divine call, and invited us to that banquet, and gave us the ability to understand, and to respond, and to think, and to dream. And it didn't begin with us being born and coming out of the womb. It began in the womb and before the womb. Who fed us when we were in the wombs of our mothers? What could our mothers do for us if we were drowning in the womb? What could they do for us if we were sick? Who nurtured us from day one? This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the compassionate, this is the merciful, who took care of you when you couldn't take care of yourself, when nobody could do anything for you. And in the most harshest moments within your life, you re-experience that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you need Him the most, when everything fails you, and you raise your hands in prayers, or your tear falls down your cheek, and you feel that pain in your heart, and then the relief comes, and you know that someone was looking out for you. Someone was watching you, that no matter what you did, when the whole world closed its doors, His door was always open, and that He loves you. These are the ni'am of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they supplicate to me with my blessings. I gave them that heart. I gave them that tongue. I gave them the ability to speak. I gave them language. I gave them language. You know, you look at, if any of you have pets at home, the limitation of language. Sometimes they have to repeat themselves 10, 15 times to get your attention, to express what they want. Yet so easily we're able to express. So easily we're able to form words and sentences and share ideas. And then he describes their emotional states. Among them is the one who wails, and the one who among them is the one who weeps. Among them is the one who sighs. Among them is the one who complains. Among them is the one who stands. Among them is the one who sits. Among them is the one who bows. And among them is the one who prostrates. They share all their conditions, all their states, all their worries with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not concerned with sharing those words and those states and those emotions with anybody else. I see with my eye that they endure for my sake. I see what they're putting up with. I see that they're suffering for my sake. And I hear with my ear their cries of love for me. The first gift I bestow upon them is that I cast a light from my own radiance into their hearts. By this light, they speak of me as I speak of them. I cast a light. Light, the use of the imagery of light is very fascinating. Because light, brothers and sisters, is also warmth. It's also understanding. It's also knowledge. It's also certainty. It's also assurance that when they speak of me, they speak of experience. They speak of somebody they know. They know for certain Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is listening to them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking care of them. By this light, they speak of me as I speak of them. The second gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the person who is a lover of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that if the heavens and the earth and all they contain were their inheritance, they would still deem it insignificant before me. Which means I remove the love of the entire world and the entire universe from their hearts. Love is also suffering. Attachment is suffering. Why we have to go through struggles? We have to go to struggles so that we detach, so that we remove those attachments. But that process of detaching from the world is hard, it's tough. Because the heart, when it clings on to something, it holds on very fast. And it doesn't let go. And it's not made to let go. It's not made to let go. And it's made to feel that pain. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He removes those attachments from the heart of those individuals. So that if they were to inherit the entire universe, they would see it all insignificant in the face of God. It's a reminder that everything that you love about this world is in essence love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a poem by a poet. Let me see if I can pull it up. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I should have it here, but I'll switch back. By Nizar Qabbani, when he talks about someone who asks him whether he could teach how to love. And he says, I am no teacher to teach you how to love, for the fish need no teacher to teach them to swim. And birds need no teacher to teach them flight. Swim on your own, fly on your own. Love doesn't come with textbooks. And the greatest lovers in history were illiterate. The greatest lovers in history were illiterate. This is to emphasize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already endowed within us that love, everything that we need in order to approach Him, everything that we need in order to understand Him, He's given to us. Going back to the narration. The second is that if the heavens and the earth and all they contain were their inheritance, they would still deem it insignificant before me. The third gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives. The third is that I turn my face toward them. Can anyone comprehend what I grant to the one upon whom I turn my face? And this is the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the unique aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to introduce us to. And this is the secret behind every act of worship. And this is the significance of religion in its essence. In a narration, the Imam alayhi salam is asked, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is asked, or Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is asked with regards to naming our children after them. He says, is there anything significant? He said, the companion comes and says to the Imam, we name our children after you all, after you and your father and your forefathers. We name our children after you. Is there a reward to this? Is there a significance to the act that we're doing? And he says, of course there is. There's a very lofty reward. And he says, هَلِ الدِّينِ إِلَّا الْحُبِّ? Is religion not but love? And this is the essence. And this is the core. And this is the focus. Unfortunately, in religious rhetoric, the aspect of love and loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not addressed and is neglected. But it's the very language of the Quran. It's the very language that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses. Everything that we do, even words that we say, like dua mustahab. Mustahab can't be done without hub. When I stand on the Musalli and I'm saying, I'm going to pray, qurbatan ila Allah ta'ala. This qurba, seeking nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that not but love? But we say it time and time again. But we have to ponder and think about every act that we engage in. And at that point, not only does night and day not become relevant, but also the legality of things becomes irrelevant. Not the prohibition aspect of it, the wajib aspect of it, that I just want to do my wajibat. I begin to live my life considering whether this act that I'm doing now, is it going to bring me nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or move me further away? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure found in this act, or is it something that bothers him, something that he dislikes? And I begin to place Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure at the forefront. And because I've experienced that nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that every single time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has saved me from myself, that I've realized that He knows what's in my best interest. And I want to gain that proximity and that nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want that safety. I want that safety on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. I want that safety. I want that comfort. I want that tranquility. Being religious and seeking God is none other than seeking happiness, than seeking joy. But not a happiness that fades away, a happiness that is infinite. One who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns His face towards, sees nothing but beauty. And this helps us understand those individuals who sacrifice their lives for their country, for religion, for their people. Those sacrifices, what brought them to that state? And what allowed them to do such acts that astonish the world? Till this day, the more they pick up the rubble, the more stories are heard, the more we find out about what took place during the attacks on Lebanon and the attacks on Gaza, the more that we're fascinated. What made a person make that decision? How did they go about their lives with such fearlessness, with such carelessness? Carelessness in the positive sense, that they didn't care, that nothing would sway them away from the truth. Not the biggest offer of money, not the offers of neither offers of money, nor land, nor wealth, nor nothing, nor an education for their children, nor the best of cars. Nothing would sway them from their sense of duty, their obligation, from doing the right thing. How do we take lessons from those individuals? What made them that way? Other than following this path. Following the path of who? The lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are they? who are the physical manifestations of this love? Who can we, in whose footsteps can we follow? The Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. In the words of Nizar Qabbani, the illiterate ones. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, not in the illiterate in the sense that is generally understood. Of the messengers of God alayhim salam. These are the lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what motivated them and gave them the strength to do what they did. And we mentioned this narration. And then the narration continues. He says, "O Ahmad, fasting is not merely as people fast. True fasting is to restrain the soul from everything I dislike. Everything that I dislike. Not just food and not just water. And God doesn't dislike food and doesn't dislike water. In fact, He created everything from water. The most beloved sight, one of the most beloved sights in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a couple sitting down at the dinner table. So there's not a thing that is mentioned here of dislike that is in relation to food and to water. But those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes, which are commonly known to all of us. He said, "O Lord, what is the perfection of fasting?" So every act has a minimal act. The minimal act of fasting is to stay away from food, to stay away from water, and then there are stages and levels of fasting. He says, what is the peak of fasting? Allah said, it is silence, seclusion, and contemplation. Silence from everything I dislike. O Ahmad, do you know when the fasting person is truly fasting? And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, no, my Lord. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, when he guards his tongue, his hands, his eyes, and all his limbs from what is forbidden. This is the fast that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is seeking from us. The fast that can endure throughout the year. This fasting of food and water, this is the temporary form. This is the minimal form. And this is what I meant by there are stages. And that we have to look to ourselves and say, we might have grown physically, we might have grown intellectually, but have we grown spiritually? If we're still doing the minimal fast, then we're doing the fast that's suitable for a child. For somebody who spiritually is still at that phase and at that stage. But again, these are the best of days, these are the best of nights. This is why the salah during this time is tenfold, is triple, is quadruple. So that you can make up for that time that was missed. When you salah now, or when you do a qada in Shahr Ramadan, or you do a wajib salah in Shahr Ramadan, when you recite a verse of the Quran in Shahr Ramadan, it's as if you recited the entire Quran. You recite 365 verses, it's as if you recited the Quran for an entire year. Every single day you completed the Quran. This is an opportunity to make up, so that what? So that we can grow spiritually. That we leave Shahr Ramadan as adult versions in our spiritual state. We're not no longer young in our spirituality. We're able to experience higher forms in the future. He says, O Ahmad, how many are those who fast, yet gain nothing from their fasting except hunger and thirst? And how many are those who stand in prayer, yet gain nothing from their prayer except sleeplessness and exhaustion? O Ahmad, when the stomach is full, the soul becomes rebellious and it forgets remembrance. It forgets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to take away that food to make a person remember. Unless you remember throughout the year, unless you maintain that presence of heart, unless you are a lover of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never leaves you, that even an act of sin can remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if one chooses to. Even that sin, as mentioned yesterday, can bring you nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it's followed by reflection, followed by taking lesson, followed by tawbah, followed by istighfar, followed by returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, followed by greater understanding. And I'll end with an example of this from one narration. To be honest and fair, I never ended up finding this narration, but I heard it in Michigan when I was a kid and it never left my memory. And it talks about an individual who commits a sin on the day and passes on the day of judgment and is thrown into the hellfire. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls upon the angels to take that person out of hell. And when the angels approach them, they look at the individual, and the individual is filled with hope. He says, maybe my punishment has ended. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell me, this is your time to go into heaven. And the angels take him, and he's excited. He goes before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders the angels to send that individual back to hell. And the individual is sent back. And then X number of years passes, either 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever it may be. And then they're removed from hell again. Once again, the person is filled with hope. The person is excited. Said, maybe this time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive me and send me to heaven. And he faces Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah looks at him, then looks at the angels and says, send this individual back to hell. Third time it happens. The fourth time it happens. And this person is becoming distressed. Now they're upset. And he said, before, if this happens again, I'm going to question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on what is going on. What is the reason for what's taking place? And so the angels come. He prepares himself. They take him. He stands before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at him and says, send this man back to hell. And the man says, 1 second. I have just one question. I'm sent to hell and then asked to come out, and I'm filled with hope and I'm filled with relief. And then I find out that I'm being sent back again. And it happens once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. And the scholar at that time mentioned that the wording was atastahzi'uni. Are you ridiculing me? Oh Allah, are you making fun of me by doing this? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to him in turn and says, when you were on earth and you committed a sin and then you asked for forgiveness and I forgave you, and then you repeated that sin again, and you asked for forgiveness and I forgave you, and then you repeated that sin again and you asked for forgiveness and I forgave you, were you then making fun of me? And that individual begins to cry. And at that moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at him and tells the angels, send that individual to heaven. It's the idea that even in a state of sin, what is required from the individual is not just repentance, but taking wisdom from what they did, from using that sin as an opportunity to become a better version of themselves. At that state of realization, when the person realized their mistake, that was all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted. So we set that standard and we set that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.